Hey, weirdos, I'm Ash.
And I'm Elena.
And this, right here, folks, is Morbid.
It's Morbid.
Hey. We've been getting so wily in the introductions lately.
We have. We've been doing a lot of recordings.
Yeah.
I think. So we're just like, gotta make it new and fresh.
I know. And I forgot even to tell you guys at the top of because this is part 2, obviously, of the Gedeon family murders. I forgot to even tell them at the top of part 1 that it was a two-parter.
Oh, it's a two-parter.
Yeah, by the way, if you're here for part 2.
Hey, this is part 2.
It's two-parter.
I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on.
It's like Michaela says, go to part 2.
Go to part 2.
That was good. that was good on both ends.
That was real good. My favorite is when she does her eyeliner and she says, nice and sharp.
That eyeliner could cut a man.
I love it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Makeup. Kayla. I don't know. I feel
we're wily.
So crazy. It's been a silly day in this pod laboratory.
It has been a silly day.
A good day, if you will.
And people keep seeing doubles of me in my house.
Yeah.
That's occurring.
So I told this story probably a month or so ago now that I saw a double of you.
Yeah.
But then Mikey admitted to us today
that he also saw a double of me.
He seen a double weeks ago and he didn't even tell us.
He didn't want to scare us.
The man didn't even inform us.
He was scared.
That's scary. What's going on with you?
That's what I'm wondering. Someone tell me.
I think it's because you're spooky.
I liked that reason.
It's like the X-Files of it all.
That explanation worked for me.
Yeah, because Elena was like, well, why isn't anybody seeing doubles of John in the house? And I said, because he's not spooky.
Yeah.
He's not.
He's really not.
You, on the other hand.
Yeah.
Spooky as fuck. So,
spooky as fuck.
And I don't live here.
Yeah.
I mean, I spend more time here than I do at my own home, but.
Yeah, I'm just surprised. I want to know what it means. What does it mean? Because I'm like, why am I showing up? Mikey said that it's because I say out loud a lot that I wish there was more of me to do the things that I need to get done. So maybe I've wished it. I'm a manifesting queen.
Maybe you manifested something, some kind of fuck shit.
Something ominous.
Because I don't love that.
Yeah,
any thread that I've found about what doppelganger things are is not good.
Well, damn.
I'm sorry to inform you. I didn't like the feeling.
Well, damn.
I didn't feel threatened when I saw She Who Shan't Be Named, but I felt scared after the experience.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
And I only saw her very quick. She didn't like me.
She didn't
and
like
that's
you?
weird because you really like me.
You.
Yeah,
So,
I've heard.
Yeah, so you've heard.
Made a career together and shit.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, ask some people and they'll say different, but. I
was like, what? I was like, no, you can't argue that. And then I was like,
no, you can't argue that. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. So I guess we're just gonna ride this. We're gonna ride this train all the way and see what happens. See who next sees a doppelganger of me in my own house.
What if your fucking kids see it though?
That would bum me out.
Yeah,
then I'd have something to say to
happen.
her. That's when me and her would come to blows.
Oh my God. What if it's like that episode of Buffy though, where he intended to split Buffy in half, but he split Xander in half. But what if somebody actually did split you in half and you have to fight to the death and only the weaker one dies?
Fuck, am I the weaker one or
I don't know. I only saw her for a second. She's ominous and she can appear and reappear, so me tends to believe.
But I have to, I don't know. I think I'm the stronger one. I'm the one getting shit done over here. She doesn't seem to be doing much. So.
Oh, I would not say that out loud.
I mean, she's me.
She's part of you.
Yeah.
She's not you, though.
Well, she needs to pull her weight around here. Oh my! Is what I'm saying.
So I'm leaving. I'm going elsewhere this weekend.
She needs to start pulling her weight. Maybe take some stuff off my hands. That would be great.
Don't say that. Oh God. I mean, take some. Now she's gonna rip your fingerprints and shit.
I haven't even seen her.
I have. And so is Michael.
Ash's face is terror.
Because I don't fuck with that kind of shit. I'll talk about that kind of stuff. I enjoy talking about paranormal and stuff and that kind of thing, but I don't fuck with it. I don't talk to it. I don't,
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, she hasn't bothered me, so that's.
Don't say
I'm
that
saying, I'm trying to
either.
say that it's fun. Like, you're not doing anything wrong. It's cool. You're just gonna. I just want to figure out what you're all about.
There you go.
It's really what it
Okay,
is.
that's-
I'm just
that's
trying to
good.
figure out where you came from.
Okay.
You know,
Let's move on before we get this whole dug any further.
we'll move on. Maybe I should. Why don't I pull a tarot card
Yeah, do it.
and see what?
Do you have a deck? Maybe I could sound bowl after. Everyone's like,
sound
maybe you
bowl.
could just tell us the
Everyone's
episode.
like, it is part 2. Will you just tell us? I'm just gonna pull one out at random.
Yeah, like feel what feels right though.
Yeah,
feel
like
the
I
energy.
put. Hold on. All right.
Energy.
You made me double think it.
Like close your eyes and feel the vibes. What'd you get? Did you get death?
No,
What'd you get?
the tower.
I fucking hate that card. I don't like it. Mikey's gonna shit himself when he doesn't have noise canceling headphones on. If you guys know anything about the tower, just try to explain that to us in this situation.
Pray for me, I guess.
All right, we got to get into this. I'm fucking terrified and I'm leaving after this. So
into this.
This gets wily.
Let's get into this.
you thought this discussion at the top was wily. Part 2 is wily.
It's real wily.
So in part 1, we got familiar with the dynamic of the Gedeon family and unfortunately found out that 2 of the 4 of them, Veronica, Ronnie, and her mother, Mary, had been murdered, along with a boarder in their apartment, Frank Byrnes. The police were pretty stumped because there was no sign of forced entry. No one had alarmed the otherwise territorial dog Tucci. And every suspect or person of interest they had so far, including the father of the family, Joe Gedeon, whom they beat mercilessly,
Yeah.
had not panned out. But taking a closer look at Ronnie's diary and the man who she simply referred to as B eventually gave them the lead that they needed. At the end of part 1, we found out that a possible suspect for the B mentioned was Bob Irwin, who had actually been pretty obsessed with Ronnie's sister Ethel and was a previous boarder at their home.
Yeah,
Not this
that's
home,
scary.
Not the apartment that they lived in currently, the one where
the
they were
bigger
killed,
one, right?
but the bigger one. Now, it's actually pretty unclear why no one had thought to mention Bob Irwin when the diary was discovered, and investigators were seeking a man with a B initial, but anyone with even the slightest familiarity with Bob Irwin probably would have thought he made a good suspect. Born in 1906 in Pasadena, California, Bob's life had been really, really difficult from the start. His father, Benjamin Irwin, was the founder of, I shit you not, Fire Baptized Holiness Church.
You didn't just put that into like a random generator online
Nor.
and that came out?
Fire
Baptized Holiness
Church, which was not a church.
No, I didn't. I was like, please tell me that is not real.
No, it was a fanatical Christian cult operating out of Northern California. Benjamin, the dad, eventually abandoned the family. It was when Bob was still very young, leaving him and his 2 brothers in the sole custody of their mother, Mary, who was equally fanatical and put her religion before literally everything else in her life, including the care of her children.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's sad.
It's his story, Bob's story, I will tell you right off the bat, is very sad.
Oh, that's terrible.
But left to their own devices, Bob and his brothers ran completely wild. I think it's Vidalin and Pember Irwin. They were Bob's older and younger brothers. They quickly fell into a life just filled with a ton of criminal activity. They would spend nearly the rest of their lives in and out of reform schools, jails, and prisons. And Bob, too, had his own run-ins with the law and spent a few years in a reform school. But unlike his brothers, he had a natural talent for art and sculpture, which earned him some sympathy with adults.
I had a feeling.
But unfortunately, while he did indeed prove to be actually an immensely talented artist, by the time he reached his late teens, Bob was also beginning to show signs of very severe mental illness and delusional thinking. In his late teens and early 20s, his talent had actually earned him the admiration of several influential people in the art world, and he actually earned apprenticeships with some pretty notable artists of the time. But due to his paranoia and explosive anger tendencies, those opportunities almost always fell apart not long after they started. Like he just had these big
He just couldn't
outbursts.
handle it.
Now, in 1932, he was sent to the Burke Foundation, which was a voluntary psychiatric facility in White Plains, New York. And after 9 months at the facility, he left the clinic, claiming that he, quote, left to get away from a couple of female employees who began to make life miserable for him after he rebuffed their sexual demands. But in truth, a social worker later clarified that Bob had left the facility because he had gotten into, quote, so many violent quarrels with other patients that he feared his behavior would lead to serious consequences.
There
A little
it is.
different. So Bob moved into Mary Gedeon's boarding house on East 53rd Street in October of 1932. So that's 5 years before the murders. Coincidentally, also right around the time that Ronnie started her diary that the police had found in 1937.
Interesting.
But it was there that he met and quickly became enamored with Ethel Gedeon. In many ways, Ethel reminded Bob of his last girlfriend, Alice Ryan, who he was still very obsessed with. Once he'd settled in at the boarding house, Bob tried to resume his art, but he found that his thoughts of Alice and preoccupation with sex dominated his mind day and night, preventing him from producing any kind of work. So I want to give you a little bit of a trigger warning for self-harm here. Finally, after a week of torment and no productivity, Bob decided to try to rid himself of these sexual preoccupations once and for all. According to Bob, on Wednesday, October 27th, he went into the bathroom at the boarding house and put a rubber band around his penis and went for a walk around town in order to numb the area. When he got back to the boarding house, he then went into the bathroom and attempted to remove his penis with a Gillette razor.
Oh boy.
Got about halfway there, but obviously that was incredibly painful, even having numbed the area. So he was not able to finish. But he managed to get himself from the house to the Bellevue Hospital, with the rubber band actually kind of acting as a tourniquet to keep him from bleeding out. He checked in under the name James Adamson and calmly asked the night intern to finish the job.
Oh boy.
The intern simply bandaged him up. Yep. And told him to come back during the daytime when the surgeon would be on. So Bob came back several hours later, still insisting that they remove his penis completely. But instead, the surgeon applied antiseptic and sutured the very serious wound, and then admitted Bob to the psychiatric ward, where he remained for nearly 5 months. And after that, after his stint there, he was transferred to Rockland State Hospital in upstate New York.
Ooh. That is rough.
Yeah.
And that is very, very sick.
Yeah. This man
Very, very
is
sick.
Severely mentally ill. And it's sad that like not much was able to be done about it to keep him in a safe place and from like to keep him, one, from hurting himself, because obviously he's inclined to do that, and to keep him from hurting anyone else. Like, this man is not somebody who should have lived on his own and like been on the streets, unfortunately.
No, absolutely not. Like, there needed to be some serious help happening here.
And the system, obviously, I mean, it's the 30s. Like, there's not a lot in the way of mental health.
Not at all.
Like anything. So,
I mean, we were just talking about, you know, the Marion Parker case, which was in the 20s. But it's like, we're not far off from there. And they were still treating it in a very different way than they treat it now.
And it's interesting, actually, because like when we get to the trial part of this, we were like talking about it in the Marion Parker case and how
William
Edward Hickman, how he was like very clearly trying.
Yeah, he was making a valiant effort to seem
like
insane.
To act like he was. In this case, he's not trying. He just is. This is very clear.
This is coming from a very genuine place of not sane.
So we're literally like taking your trial that we just discussed and turning it on its head with this trial.
How it would go if he really was.
Yeah, it's interesting that we ended up doing these back to back, because we don't usually tell each other about our cases until they happen.
Yeah.
But anyway, during his time at Rockland, Bob proved an unruly patient. He made several escape attempts, including one incident when he made it all the way to downtown Manhattan.
Holy shit.
To the apartment of his previous psychiatrist from Bellevue.
Oh, fuck that.
Luckily, he was able to be apprehended and returned to Rockland before anything happened.
Jesus.
At Rockland, that was the place where he received his first official diagnosis of hebephrenia. It was a subtype of schizophrenia, which the psychiatrist at the time described as being characterized, quote, by foolish mannerisms, senseless laughter, delusions, and regressive behavior. This diagnosis
Interesting.
actually no longer appears in the
I
diagnostic.
was gonna say.
Yeah, it's not in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now we would just classify it as simple schizophrenia.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
It's dated. But the symptoms of delusional and disordered thinking and distorted reality, among others, are still acknowledged in the schizophrenia diagnosis.
okay.
So now he would just be called schizophrenic or treated as such. So after a few years of bouncing around from one boarding house to another, Bob reappeared at the door of Mary Gedeon's boarding house in the early summer of 1934. Just a few months after Ethel's marriage to her first husband was annulled. Because remember, she had a teen marriage of her own.
Yeah, that was like a thing.
Yeah. I think it was a thing to get out of the house.
Yeah.
Because I think the house was very dysfunctional.
Yeah, for sure.
So now that he was once again in Ethel's presence, Bob felt particularly inspired, actually, because she was, like I said, she was beautiful. And he began sculpting again. He was devoted to Ethel from the moment that he returned to the house. But while she liked the attention and the adoration that she received from him, she was never actually willing to commit to a relationship with him. For her, it was just kind of like a fun thing.
Yeah, just like flirting with.
She found him to be like an attractive man.
Yeah, so
a lot
she's
of
just
people
like,
actually did.
Yeah, so she's just like, you know what?
Yeah,
We're just having a flirtation.
it's a fun thing, but she never saw it
Yeah.
seriously. So, and actually, by that time, she had already started dating Joe Kudner, who she ended up marrying, and who was obviously far more stable than Bob.
Yeah.
And somebody that she could see a future with.
Yeah.
But despite her intention to marry Joe, she still indulged Bob, flirting with him and actually allowing him to sculpt her.
Yeah.
So it was while he was living with the Gedeons that Bob began experiencing delusional thinking and started believing strongly in what he called visualization, which he believed was the ability to manifest things purely by mental power and focus.
Okay.
He believed that through the process of visualization, he could obtain everything he wanted for himself, and he became very frustrated when things didn't appear to be going his way.
Which I imagine happened a lot.
Yes, absolutely. He was absolutely desperate to be with Ethel, but no matter what he did or how he tried to prove his love for her, she was resistant because she loved Joe.
Yeah.
After several months in the house, Mary, the mother, who had always been actually pretty fond of Bob, took him aside and very gently expressed her concerns that, for the sake of her daughter's future, she was, quote, anxious that Ethel have nothing to do with Bob.
Ooh.
Which I think she put it gentler than that, but that was essentially the message.
What he took from it.
And she said she wanted her daughter to marry a wealthy man and not have to struggle like she had in her own marriage. So I think she was saying to Bob, like, I want something better for Ethel.
And also, like, I want you to move on.
Yeah, because she liked him too.
She's not going to marry you. She's not going to be with you. Like, you need to move on. Like,
yeah. And it sounds like she went about it in like the kindest way that she could.
That she possibly could, exactly.
You know? But undeterred by Mary's words, Bob continued to pursue Ethel romantically. And a few months later, while the two were out for a walk along the pier, he insisted that they should get married.
Oh, boy.
Now, at that point, having grown tired of Bob's relentless advances and honestly his increasingly bizarre talk of visualization, I can never say that, and other strange beliefs, Ethel finally explained that while she hoped they could remain friends, she had accepted Joe Kudner's proposal and they were going to get married in the coming months.
Oof.
Bob later told a reporter, I just went crazy. In the weeks that followed, he spiraled into depression and heavily contemplated suicide as he bounced from one boarding house to another. And then he was dealt another serious blow in October when, after putting up with his poor attitude and sullenness for months, his boss let him go from the production factory he was working at. In response, Bob grabbed a nearby meat cleaver and threatened to, quote, split his boss's head right down the middle.
Holy shit.
So now out of work and desperate, Bob actually returned to Rockland Hospital where he voluntarily committed himself for treatment, which...
That's interesting.
It is interesting that he does, like, obviously know enough.
He recognizes.
It seems like he has these periods where he's good.
Where he's, like, lucid.
Lucid, exactly. Yeah. And, like, realizes, like, oh, no, I need to get some kind of help. And he goes to get the help. And it's like, I wish that they would have just recognized that he needed to stay there.
Yeah, because it's like...
Because I think this is, like...
it was just, like...
Before medication, before...
It was before any of the advances of understanding what these things are, how you can deal with them, tools that you can use to get through these things. psychiatrists helping you like be like, okay, when you feel this way, this is what I want you to do, or this is what I want you to try, or visualize this. Like
coping
appeal
mechanisms
to his visualization thing, but like make it more of a tool that he can use to like get himself out of these really intense emotional situations.
Yeah.
And it's like they just didn't have that.
And just offer him a safe space to stay while he
is going through
all of that. Exactly.
Oof.
So based on everything that they learned about him, detectives became convinced that Bob Irwin was most definitely their suspect.
Sounds like it.
Yes. But the only problem was they had no idea where he was. A police spokesperson told reporters on April 5th, "We've been looking for him since the murders. We think he's the man. I hope he hasn't committed suicide."
Oof.
In response to a citywide alert, Bob's former landlord, who had actually been renting him a room directly across the street from the police precinct, contacted police. But by the time they arrived at the boarding house, Bob had packed his belongings and fled.
Oh, damn.
And the landlady had no idea where he had gone. But she did remember that Bob had 2 suitcases with him, and one of them had a distinct-looking strap wrapped around it with a large buckle to keep it closed. So that was a pretty key detail to remember.
Yeah, that's a good detail.
So the news about the manhunt for Bob Irwin came as a shock to very few people who knew him well. But among those who found it hard to believe was actually Ethel Gedeon. On April 6th, she told reporters, "I cannot believe Irwin is the man who killed my mother and sister." While she provided investigators with everything she knew about Bob, more than 18,000 officers mobilized across the city in search of the suspected killer. At Rockland Hospital, detectives learned that Bob had actually been discharged the previous October, and since then had just been kind of bopping around to various boarding houses across the city. And during his time at Rockland, his most recent time, they informed investigators that his religious delusions had worsened, and he'd actually started studying religion, like almost exclusively, completely casting aside his sculpting and his art.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And it's like that's the only outlet that man has.
And where he was
had.
Yeah, and where he was raised in such a place where like religion was not a place of comfort or a place of solace or something to believe in. It was like probably a punishment.
Probably
like,
not a good place to be going.
Yeah, it wasn't great. So on a hunch, investigators went to Grand Central Station and asked the baggage check attendant whether anyone had checked luggage resembling that which had been described by Bob's landlady. As luck would have it, somebody matching Bob's description actually had checked that very bag they were looking for, and that person had not been back to retrieve it in days. So presented with the suitcase held closed with the strap and the buckle, investigators searched its contents and found inside them that small alarm clock that Ethel said was missing from her sister's dressing table at the apartment. So this piece of evidence only further confirmed their suspicion that Bob was the killer. The hunt for Bob Irwin was the largest since the hunt for the Lindbergh kidnapper 5 years earlier.
Wow.
But despite their best efforts, it was not the NYPD who ultimately found Irwin, but a tip from a reader of True Detective magazine.
You could not write this.
You literally couldn't.
You could not write this.
Just as they had done before, the editors of True Detective remained committed to helping find Ronnie's killer because remember, she worked for them. She posed for the covers and she was friends with them.
Yeah, they got to know her.
They loved her. So to that end, they offered $1,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Today, that would be over $21,000.
Wow.
It was huge. In late June of 1937, an employee at the, I think it's Statler Hotel in Cleveland, Ohio, happened to be flipping through her copy of True Detective on her break, and she noticed a police photograph of Bob Irwin, and she thought, that actually looks a lot like the new barback, Bob Murray.
Stop.
Now this motherfucker, amused by the resemblance, showed the photo to Bob. And from the look on his face, she could tell that it was way more than a mere coincidence.
Yeah.
So Bob fled the hotel that day.
Why would you do that?
Why would you show him and say like, oh, this guy looks like you?
Come on.
Like, that's a dumbass move. I'm sorry. So he fled the hotel, and by the time detectives made it there, he was gone again.
Awesome.
So by the summer of 1937 now, Bob Irwin's photo was plastered across billboards, magazines, newspapers all around the country at this point. And it was only a matter of time before they caught up with him. Wanting to get ahead of the story, Bob ended up placing a call to the Chicago Tribune with an offer he knew they would not be able to resist. He told the operator, "I'm a friend of Robert Irwin, who is wanted in New York for the Gedeon murders. He wants to give himself up. What kind of deal can you make with him?" Now, after getting
And
through...
this is him.
This is him.
This is actually him just pretending to be a friend.
He's like, I have a friend. After getting through to the right person, he offered the paper a complete exclusive confession in exchange for $5,000 cash, a white linen suit, and a Panama hat.
Stop.
Given what they were being offered, the Tribune jumped at the opportunity.
Of course they did.
And agreed to meet him at the office of managing editor John Dienhart, where Bob sat down and told his story.
The man who did it is sitting pretending to be a friend telling the story. If this doesn't tell you that...
Oh, at this point, he wasn't even pretending to be a friend. He was
now he's saying it's actually him.
Yeah, it was the friend who called and set all this up, but was like, I can get Bob to you. So Bob sat down with them.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm speechless.
Now, at that time, it was actually pretty common for the press to pay criminals for their exclusive rights to their stories or any kind of other information that they deemed valuable as news reporters. But this was the first time a newspaper had knowingly and deliberately shielded a murderer from the law in order to get a story.
Fucked.
He murdered 3 people.
He came in this place and said, I'll tell you the story. They were like, yeah, let's just let him do that.
I'm also...
And not call the police. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
I'm so surprised that they weren't charged with obstruction of justice.
Truly.
I think it got so sensational and like it got so beyond that probably once he does eventually get convicted. So once it ended there, they were like, whatever. But I'm like, what the fuck kind of precedent does that set?
Yeah, that's really fucked up.
Now there's no fucking way ever that could happen again. But this happened.
I'm shook by that. And the fact that his name, because you've been saying Bob, so I forgot that his name was Robert
Irwin.
And I think Steve Irwin's son is named Robert Irwin.
You're right.
And he's a lovely, lovely guy.
He is lovely. I follow that whole family on TikTok.
He's very much a Steve Irwin, and it's bumming me out so much to hear that name, like in conjunction with like.
It's weird that we
so
started this with doppelgangers.
Whoa, that's weird.
A little strange. This is really just same name.
Robert Irwin, the Steve Irwin DNA seems lovely.
Oh yeah, seems stand-up guy. But the Chicago Tribune at the time, not a stand-up newspaper.
No.
So they were like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, sure.
Because essentially they just wanted to secure the exclusive rights to have advantage over every paper in the world, which honestly is hilarious because, spoiler alert, it didn't end up working out for them.
I can't imagine why.
No, but they did they were the first to technically get the story. On the evening of June 26, 1937, Bob Irwin sat down with reporters and photographers from the Tribune wearing a suit at the Morrison Hotel and just started his story.
Wow.
He told
this is so bizarre.
I've never heard of another case like this. He told them, that night I said to myself, I'm going up there and killing Ethel.
Oh.
I never intended to get anybody but her. I thought that after killing Ethel, then they would kill me in the chair, but I didn't care.
Wow.
He continued on that he had indeed been in love with Ethel and that when she rejected him, he became so obsessed that he was just not able to focus on anything else. And after several months of hospitalization, he decided the only way to regain his focus was to rid himself of Ethel, and that's why he was resolved to kill her. But not wanting to mar her beauty, he said he decided to stab her in the back of the neck with an ice pick from his apartment.
That is so chilling.
And it's such disordered thinking. I don't want to ruin her beauty, but I want to end her life.
What the
fuck? I feel like that just goes to show you, like,
that
something was not
connecting.
clicking upstairs. Yeah. On the night of March 28th, he went to the apartment on East 50th Street and rang the bell. Having always liked Bob, Mary happily let him into the apartment.
Oh, Mary.
Where she was prepping for Easter dinner the following day. He told the reporter, Mrs. Gedeon did not want me to have anything to do with Ethel. Outside of that, she was always very friendly to me. They chatted pleasantly in the kitchen for a short time. Mary even introduced Bob to her newest boarder, Frank Byrnes.
Oh.
But eventually, Bob started becoming impatient and asking when Ethel would be home. Confused, Mary explained that Ethel had moved out of the house years earlier because she was now married to Joe.
Ooh.
But according to Harold, I think it's Schechter.
Yeah, we've done a couple of his books.
I think you used his book for the Ed Gein case.
Yes.
He wrote a book about this case called The Mad Sculptor.
Ah.
And according to him, the last time Bob had visited the apartment, Ethel had actually been staying with her mother temporarily. And, quote, Bob had gotten it into his head that she and Joe Kudner were separated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So after a few hours, Mary became impatient and somewhat bluntly explained that Ethel wasn't going to show up. And since it was getting late, she wanted to go to bed. But undeterred, Bob insisted he was going to stay until he saw Ethel, which prompted Mary to yell, "Get out of here or I'll call the Englishman," referring to Frank Byrnes, who was now asleep in the next room.
Oh, no.
The threat caused Bob to become completely irate, and he rushed toward Mary. He recalled, "At that moment, I hit her with everything I had. She fell back on the floor with her legs back over her head. I grabbed her by the neck. She scratched my face like nobody's business."
Good. Good for her.
I know. He said he then choked her for nearly 20 minutes until she was dead.
What?
And then he simply sat back down at the kitchen table and continued on waiting for Ethel. He said, "She was the one I felt I must kill. I simply had to finish what I planned." And remember, Frank Byrnes is asleep in the next room, but he didn't hear anything because he was deaf in one ear.
That one
And he was
ear.
asleep on his good ear.
Oh, man.
As he waited, it occurred to Bob that Ronnie might return home before Ethel, which presented a serious problem. He told the interviewer, "She was beautiful, and I hate to destroy beauty."
What the fuck?
He's an artist. In that moment, Bob was reminded of something that he'd read recently about how a bar of soap wrapped in a towel could make an effective blackjack that he could use to stun Ronnie and nothing more. So he went to the kitchen and grabbed the bar of soap from the sink.
That's why that's soap.
That's why it was there, which he wrapped in a dish towel and then returned to his hiding place in the bedroom. A little after 3 a.m., Bob heard Ronnie returning from her night out, which lined up perfectly with what Stephen Butter had told them. And after saying goodbye to Butter, she entered the apartment and went straight to the bathroom, where she started her little nightly routine, removing her makeup, just getting ready for bed. He said, "She stayed in there the longest time. I thought she would never come out." But finally, just before 4 a.m., Ronnie entered the bedroom, and Bob swung the soap bar as hard as he could, striking her on the head. He said, "It didn't have the slightest effect," which, like, obviously. But in his mind, that was totally going to work. So with his blackjack having crumbled to the floor and Ronnie having now seen his face, he grabbed her by the throat and started choking her, demanding to know where Ethel was.
And she just came home to her house.
Yeah, just
in the middle of the night.
How many times does everybody else in the world do that?
This is BTK behavior of like waiting in someone's closet until they come, like until the middle of the night. Like that's scary. Fucked up.
Now, when Ronnie explained that her sister was at home with her husband, Bob lost all control and started strangling her. He told the reporter, "I wanted to let Ronnie live if I could. We were always pals. I suppose she thought I was going to rape her. She said, 'Please don't touch me. I just had an operation, and the doctor said if I have intercourse, I could die.'" Bob estimated that he held on tightly around Ronnie's throat for nearly 2 hours.
What the fuck?
But he couldn't say for certain. He said, "When you get in a mix-up like that, you don't think about what you're doing, and time means nothing."
I'm like without words.
It's beyond. So once he had choked all the life out of her, he ripped off her slip and left her body on the bed, and then stuffed Mary's body under the bed. He never said why he did that.
Yeah, maybe just so, I don't know. The only thing I can think of is she wouldn't be immediately found,
I guess. But, like why he ripped off her slip, I mean, Ronnie's slip. Like why he left her naked on the bed.
Yeah. I mean, who knows?
But he was about to leave the room when he noticed this is really interesting and just strange. He was about to leave the room when he noticed the small green alarm clock sitting on the dresser still. And to him, he said the glowing green clock resembled an eye that had been watching him while he murdered both women. So he grabbed it and stuffed it into his pocket as he left the room.
Wow.
Right?
I mean, that tells you something's
he's not of sane
not
mind.
here.
I mean, this is absolutely fucking horrific.
Absolutely. This is brutal.
So Bob was about to leave the apartment and go back to his boarding house when he remembered Frank Byrnes. The boarder had been in the apartment the entire time, but like I said, never woke up because of his hearing. So when Byrnes had come in several hours earlier, Mary introduced Bob by name. So Bob felt that if he left Frank alive, there was a good chance that he would be able to identify him. So he crept into Frank Byrnes's room, using the ice pick that he intended to use to kill Ethel, and stabbed Byrnes in the head.
But doesn't that point to not wanting to be caught? And to making pretty logical moves to make sure that you are not identified?
That's the thing. I think he's a diagnosed schizophrenic. So
absolutely. But I mean, like, in this moment, I'm like, because you can be a diagnosed schizophrenic, commit a crime like this, and they can still say you're guilty because you were sane in the moment, in the action of committing the crime.
Yeah.
He's sane.
Well, just wait.
That's sane behavior.
You are not the only one that thinks that.
Yeah, I fully believe that.
So, and we'll get to it because you're not alone there. He said, I struck him the first time in the temple, so far as it would go. The poor fellow lay there twitching, but did not bleed. I had to hit him 11 times.
Holy shit.
With all 3 occupants dead, Bob grabbed his coat and left the apartment a little after 6 a.m. He finished by telling his audience from the Tribune, I'm certainly sorry I killed all 3 of them. There was only the one I was after, and that was Ethel. I don't know whether it was hate or love that made me want to kill her. If she had come in first, I probably would have killed her and nobody else.
Wow.
Before
Imagine being Ethel here.
I can't imagine
being... There's so many layers to it of knowing that if you had walked in, you were the one that was getting this. But also then to know that 3 people died in place of you.
And 2 of them being your sister
2
and
of them
mother.
being, yeah, like... And by no fault of your own.
No, but the survivor's guilt,
Oh,
you would
it must
already
be
have
unbelievable.
survivor's guilt anyway,
Yeah.
like no matter who it was
Even if
that
it
killed
had nothing
them.
to do with you.
But then learning that you're the intended victim, like,
Yeah.
that would ruin me.
Yeah.
But before ending the interview, the reporter asked what Bob was expecting to happen to him now that he had confessed and would be apprehended. And he answered, whatever's coming to me, I'll take.
Wow.
So it wasn't until after the evening edition of the Herald and Examiner hit the newsstands that investigators learned Bob had confessed to killing Ronnie, Mary, and Frank. The front page article had scooped the competition and been the first to report the news.
That's fucked
So
up.
the Chicago Tribune literally just obstructed the fuck out of justice to get this interview.
Get that front page scoop.
And they didn't even get it. It ended up
Wow.
getting scooped by the competition somehow. Just like
Wow.
word of mouth, I think. But detectives naturally thought it was them and not the Chicago Tribune who had done the interview. And it was only when they reached the offices of the Herald and Examiner that they learned Bob was still holed up at the Morrison Hotel with the staff from the Tribune.
Fuck.
Yup.
This is so bizarre.
So on June 28th, 1937, Bob was transported back to New York after voluntarily waiving extradition and declaring his willingness to take responsibility for the Gedeon murders. According to the New York Times, Bob was jaunty, giggling at times, and without the slightest trace of remorse, as he repeatedly confessed the murders to the New York detectives who'd been sent to retrieve him from Chicago. Once they arrived back in New York, Bob was taken to police headquarters and questioned until just before 3 a.m. A police spokesperson told reporters he stated that he had made a statement to Lieutenant Owens and Detective Crimmins confessing to the murders in the plane en route from Chicago to New York, and that statement was true.
Wow.
According to investigators, he was fully cooperative from the moment that he was picked up in Chicago and actually even seemed eager to get back to New York and face his penalty. One reporter wrote, he boasted to them that he was willing to plead guilty to the murders and that he was not afraid of death in the electric chair.
Okay, buddy.
He doesn't even plead guilty, so I'm like, what?
So this is all just shit.
So Bob appeared before the Court of General Sessions on July 1st, where his lawyer, Samuel Leibowitz, entered a plea of not guilty. According to the New York Times, the courtroom was packed with, quote, an admiring crowd of middle-aged women hoping to glimpse Irwin.
Get it together.
Like what?
Get it together.
Just like in part 1 and every other fucking part we do of any case, people are gonna people.
People are gonna people.
Like, what is that?
Like, come on, man.
You, first of all, you want to catch a glimpse of a man who was intending to kill a woman that he was romantically obsessed with, and because she wasn't there, he killed her mother's sister and aborted her at the house.
Like, here's the thing.
That, like, gets you going?
That's the problem. It's like, I understand being curious and, like, being interested in the case and wanting to see who this guy is that did this.
Absolutely, but they were, like,
But going to be like,
romantically
oh my God.
interested.
Like, that's, wow.
It's like the girls that showed up to see Ted Bundy and be like, please marry me.
And literally parted their hair the same way
that
and
he
dyed their
liked.
hair.
Yep.
Because that's what he liked. Like,
Or
what
like
the fuck?
Charlie Manson's girls. Like,
Yeah.
It's such a fucking weird pathology.
It's a strange, yeah,
People
I don't
are
get
weird.
it.
But after entering his plea, Bob was removed from the court and returned to his cell to await trial, which was tentatively scheduled for the fall. In his statement to the press, Leibowitz said, "This is the most interesting case I have ever had due to the social implications. You cannot tell me how many more Irwins are running around loose. I hope that society will, learning a lesson from the Irwin case, make a more logical and sane approach to the problem dealing with the criminal insane." Which, like, for a defense attorney to say, like, yeah, like, he's wrong, but I think he's insane. And the way that he said it, like, hopefully society will figure their shit out.
Yeah.
It's a very...
Like, this is a lesson for sure.
For the time, I'm like, wow.
Mildly progressive.
Yeah,
like,
it's a pretty progressive view. That's the word I was looking for. Now, in early September, before Bob's trial was to begin, Samuel Leibowitz arranged a press conference in which he promised his client would be on hand to answer questions for the press. However, when Bob was brought to the interview room in the courthouse, he was, quote, wild-eyed, unshaved, and unkempt, and appeared to have no idea what was going on. Once he settled in the chair beside Leibowitz, Bob, unprompted, blurted out, "For 2 weeks, they had doctors staring and leering at me. Their eyes, they bothered me. I couldn't stand it. They beat me from behind with a blackjack. 6 men with blackjacks. I couldn't fight 6 men with blackjacks." He's just talking nonsense.
Yeah. All right.
Which maybe is because he's in a state of whatever he deals with, or maybe is pointed.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like he's obviously clinically there's something wrong.
Yes.
But I think the thing that they're going to have to prove here is that he was
sane at the time of the murders.
The time of the murders.
So Bob said little more to the reporters before being returned to his cell, but it was clear that to the reporters that the entire press conference was part of the defense attorney's trial strategy. Whether it was true or not, it was genuine or not, it was strategic.
Absolutely, because it's like they can use it. Like, no matter what.
Exactly.
You know, like, they're just like, okay, this happened, great. Like,
and
throw
either
him out
way,
in front of some cameras and show everybody that he's clearly not, you know, he's not all with it right now.
It's going to sway public opinion, no matter what.
Of course it is.
And according to the New York Times, Mr. Leibowitz, who was apparently laying the groundwork for a defense based on a plea of insanity, told reporters he thought Irwin was a dual personality. Leibowitz himself told the reporters that he had seen his client just 1 day earlier and he seemed calm and collected, but then added, "You saw how he acted today, like a raving maniac."
It's wild how they talked.
It really is. You're like, yikes.
Yeah.
After several months of delays, Bob finally went before the Court of General Sessions on March 24th, 1938. Because he had already confessed, the only issues being considered were, quote, the mental condition of the defendant, Robert Irwin, at the time of the commission of each of the alleged crimes, whether he is now capable of understanding the proceeding and making his defense on the trial of the indictments.
Yeah.
So essentially exactly what happened with your trial.
Yeah.
With your last episode. But unlike a traditional trial, in this case, the jury was presented with testimony taken from 20 sessions of the Lunacy Commission.
The Lunacy Commission?
That was a legit thing.
I've never heard that.
The Lunacy Commission.
Wow.
And transcripts from the 28 witness interviews, as well as physical and documentary evidence. In support of his client's compromised mental state, Leibowitz presented testimony from Dr. Leland Hinsey, assistant director of the New York Psychiatric Institute, and Dr. Bernard Gluick, I think it is, the former director of the psychiatric clinic at Sing Sing, both of whom had actually evaluated Bob. In total, both men spent nearly 70 hours interviewing Bob, so this was a dedicated process. Yeah. And during that time, Hinsey said Bob's behavior would sometimes become frightening and erratic. He said he would begin by excessive talking and would be considerably upset when he was interrupted for some explanations on some point he had raised. According to Hinsey, these interruptions often prompted Bob to, quote, stare at the examiner, grit his teeth, pound on the table viciously with his fist, and yell that he would not suffer any interruptions.
That would be terrifying.
Even just writing it and like picturing it was a terrifying experience. Like, I can't imagine being there.
Stare at the examiner and grit his teeth and yell and like pound his fist. Like, that's a lot.
That's scary. Now, one subject which Bob would talk at length about was his spiritual beliefs. Harold Schechter wrote, Irwin worked himself into a pitch of near frenzied exultation while discoursing on his current efforts to transform his body through the power of electricity. Bob told the psychiatrist, there is no limit to the extent that I can build myself mentally and physically through electricity. I can stop the action of my heartbeat, prevent my lungs from expanding and contracting, control the passage of food through my body. All of this done by electricity.
False.
Incorrect.
Wow.
But arguing that Bob was sane when he committed the murders and knew what he was doing was both morally wrong and illegal was the district attorney, William Dode, and Elena. And he pointed to several instances in which Irwin appeared to be concealing information.
Bada boop.
Upon his arrest, for example, Bob was reluctant to disclose information about the crimes, which implied a certain level of awareness of what he had done. And similarly, when he was asked about the fee that he received for his confession, Bob explained that he planned to use a small portion for himself, saying, "If I find myself in an institution for life or something like that, I would like to get a small amount of money so that I can hire some one of my fellow patients or prisoners, whatever you want to call them. In such an institution, for $1 a week, you can get people to do many things for you."
I mean, that is some high level.
That's high level
planning.
And planning, yes.
Like, damn.
Right?
Yeah.
This is such an interesting case because it's very clear that this man is insane. Like, you can't argue that.
He is a very ill man. I mean, his actions before this and, you know, what he did, the self-harm that he did to himself and all that stuff there is something wrong there.
But I see what you're saying, and I see what the DA is saying here with, by criminal definition, not so much. He, like you when you pointed it out, that he killed Frank Byrnes because he knew somebody could identify him.
Yeah, he was like, he's been introduced to me by name and he saw my face. And even Ronnie. Yeah. Ronnie turned around and saw his face after she didn't get knocked out with the quote unquote blackjack made out of soap. And so he was like, I had to kill her. Like that's criminal thinking. That's sane thinking. That's ordered thinking.
Exactly.
And it's like, by
criminal definition,
you can be extraordinarily mentally ill, but if your moment of lucidity is when you murder someone with your fucking bare hands and you know it's wrong, to jail you go. Like, you're guilty.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. Like, you can't get off of that. If you were lucid while you did it and you know what you did and you still did it, and then you made steps to cover it up and to make sure you didn't get identified, there's really no arguing that.
But then there's the whole issue of, can you be institutionalized, or can you be sent to prison when really you should be institutionalized?
He should absolutely be institutionalized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I think you should still, and I think that's where the problem lies, because a lot of times figuring out whether somebody's quote unquote insane or not, criminally insane, is to sentence them.
Yeah.
And usually it's like, if you're not insane, then straight to prison you go.
Yeah.
But in this case, this man is not going to, like, prison's not going to do anything for him.
No.
And not that prison is, like, necessarily meant to do anything for anybody, but it kind of is. Like, it's kind of set there for rehabilitation.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
Whereas somebody like this is not necessarily going to be able to be rehabilitated.
But you also look at an institution, and especially at this time, it might be worse.
Oh, it might be, absolutely.
It might be even worse. It's like, I don't think he's going to come out of there, ready to take on the world either.
No, but then you think of the danger in which you're putting the other prisoners. So it's like, there's this whole gray area, I feel like, where it's, like, I feel like the definition of criminal insanity is so hard.
It's hard. There's a lot of,
because there's so many different variables,
gray areas
and gray areas.
But this one, I'm like, he was sane when he committed those murders. In my
and that's
opinion.
the thing. I think I agree with that. I think he was when he committed the murders, but then I feel like it's a whole different story of, okay, well, like, what the fuck do we do with him now? You know?
Yeah.
So Dodge argued that this was evidence that Irwin had already contemplated his options upon arrest, and that, quote, Irwin contemplated the possibility of a trial which would terminate by committing him to an institution for the insane. According to the prosecution, the facts of Irwin's voluntary surrender in Chicago and the shrewd bargain struck with the Chicago Herald-Examiner, which Irwin initiated and accomplished by himself, indicates a mentality of keenness and comprehension, which, yeah, it does.
Yeah. And I also am like, I mean, I don't put a whole lot of stock in diagnoses that happened in the 30s. So it's like, I don't even know if he's schizophrenic.
Yeah,
I don't know what
really
his diagnosis would be now.
I don't know what it would be now.
And that's the thing. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not going to armchair diagnose him because I don't know enough about him and his life and what he's done. I just know that there's moments where he is showing criminal cunning.
Definitely.
And that's not, like, that's not, I don't know. It's just, there's a lot.
It's a tough one. There's a lot of gray area within this case.
He is completely right when he says that. That deal that he struck with the newspaper.
That's cunning, for sure.
That's a cunning deal. And it was
keen.
For his benefit. And it's like, but it also shows like a lack of, I don't even know, like an overinflated sense of self almost, that like, or an ego of some kind, like a hubris here, that like he thought he could do that. And then it's like, and then what did you think would happen? Like even he could barely answer that.
Yeah, I
like
don't think he went from A to C. I think he went from A to B with that plan.
So there's that part of it. Yeah. That's a disjointed thought.
That's the thing.
So there is a lot of different details that are confusing.
And I don't know a lot about schizophrenia, but what I do know is that there are periods of clarity, and then there are periods of like
which
struggle.
That happens with a lot of
mental illnesses and diagnoses. Yeah. So, after weighing the evidence, the jury determined that Robert Bob Irwin was in fact sane at the time of the murders.
Wow.
Because of that, his case went to criminal trial on November 7th, 1938, where Samuel Leibowitz did everything in his power to stall the trial, objecting to jurors and repeatedly filing motions to postpone the trial, which honestly, that's a tough case.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he would need all the time in the world to prepare for that. But then, on November 15th, the press reported the surprising news that Bob had accepted a plea deal from the prosecution, where he would plead guilty to second-degree murder on all 3 charges, and they would remove the death penalty. The district attorney told the press, because of Irwin's previous record of insanity, there was a possibility that the jury might have held him legally insane, in which case he might finally have been released from confinement.
And see, that's where my issue comes with the whole, like,
and I see that.
If he's found insane during that, quote unquote, then they'll put him somewhere and then they'll release him. Mm-hmm. And it's like, like a lot of times that's not going to work. A lot of times that's where we have another string of horrible crimes that people pay the ultimate price for because this person was let out and deemed to not be sane during this whole thing. And it's like, he would do it again.
And I think that's where it's like a problem with the justice system and a problem within like hospitalization and that kind of thing. Like I feel like the whole system then and even now is just it needs to be revisited.
And it makes the jury's job even worse because they're sitting here having to say, okay, if we find this person not legally sane during this and he gets committed to an institution, is he going to be walking out of there in a year?
Exactly.
Like less than that sometimes.
Because you would have to think of that.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
Yeah.
So instead, the prosecution intended to recommend a sentence of 90 years to life on each count to be served consecutively.
Okay.
On November 28th, Bob appeared before Judge James Wallace, who I'm almost 99% sure we have covered before. Like he's been in cases that we've covered. Just sounds very familiar. That was in the Court of General Sessions, and he was sentenced to 139 years in prison. 99 years for the murder of Byrnes, and 20 years for each of the murders of Mary and Veronica Gedeon.
Wow.
When asked if he had anything to say on his own behalf, Bob said, "Ordinarily, this business of asking a prisoner if he has anything to say is a mere formality. The man is generally guilty of willful aggression against society, or he is too ignorant to speak for himself. I'm not guilty of any willful aggression against society." And then he wasn't done yet. But Judge Wallace interrupted and said, "This is no time for a long speech or extended remarks." But Bob ignored the judge and continued, "This is a farce. I have a definite and real reason why sentence should not be pronounced. You say you represent justice. I say you do not. You represent a rich man's justice."
I think you just killed 3 people pretty brutally.
Yeah.
And then made great effort to hide it.
Great effort.
So I think that's the problem, Bob.
Yep. So, after managing to get Bob under control, Judge Wallace reread the charges and the sentence, and then turned to the district attorney to make it clear that he had accepted the guilty pleas on the recommendation of the district attorney's office, but he had done so with reservations. The judge. He said, "There is no question the defendant is mentally unsound. In my opinion, the state has lost nothing in accepting these pleas, except possibly the execution of this defendant, and that would bring no credit to the state."
Yeah.
So he's like, I don't really know if what we're doing here is great.
Yeah. But he was like, but I guess we're not executing him, which,
So, that's good.
woo for us.
But it turned out that Judge Wallace was not the only one who questioned whether sending Irwin to prison was the right decision or not. A little more than a week into his sentence at Sing Sing, Bob was transferred to Dannemora State Hospital for the criminally insane after 2 Sing Sing psychiatrists evaluated him and deemed him very definitely insane, quote unquote.
Yeah.
While at Dannemora, he studied foreign languages and eventually taught himself French, German, Latin, Polish, Italian, and, quote, also invented an international language of his own.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
When he wasn't spending time on his education, he wrote letters to his former psychiatrist, Frederick Wortham, and even began a long-distance correspondence with a woman in Cuba.
Wow.
However, within a year, his anger got the better of him, and he became one of the more unruly patients at the hospital, who most often required solitary confinement.
He's aggressive.
He is aggressive and dangerous. In 1975, he died at the Mateoan, I think it is, State Hospital for the Criminally Insane after an 8-year battle with cancer. And he was 67 years old when he died.
Wow.
The fact that he lived until 1975.
Yeah.
It's so strange to...
Yeah, to like wrap your brain around that time frame.
But
That's a wild one.
And it's just for his life was sad, like
Absolutely.
when he was a child. So you feel bad for the child.
Absolutely.
You feel so bad for Ethel Gideon.
Oh my
for
goodness.
having to live the rest of her life knowing that she was the intended victim and that her mother and sister and an innocent boarder at the house.
That they just became collateral damage.
Exactly.
In his whole thing.
And
then for the victims, it's like Frank is just sleeping in his bed. Just a boarder in that house.
Just wrong place, wrong time entirely.
The mom was always good to him.
That's the
Ronnie
thing.
was always good to him. They
the
did
whole
nothing.
family was good to this man.
They did nothing to deserve that except he just couldn't have Ethel and he couldn't handle it.
He just became obsessed. Like,
yeah, scary.
Scary obsessed.
Wow.
But it's such a wild case, and it was handled so wild on so many different levels by the press. First with publishing fake details about the murders when nobody even knew anything yet.
Yeah, that's gnarly.
Exploiting Ronnie and like all the photographers that had worked with her. But then like True Detective being like,
they
fuck
came
all y'all.
out smelling like roses here.
Yeah.
Like the one that you say like, oh man, those detective magazines, they're the ones who come out and are like, we actually give a shit about her.
Exactly.
Like that's crazy.
And then the fucking Chicago Tribune.
That.
Like way back when, of course.
Yeah, way back
I
when.
was like, oh my God.
You guys wouldn't do that now, right?
You would never do that now.
You would never do that now.
They couldn't do that.
No, they
now.
could not.
There's no fucking
Of course
way.
not.
I'm like, how is this allowed?
It's wily behavior.
Insane. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
That is part 2 for you, and that wraps it up.
Damn.
Veronica
what a
Gideon
story.
and the Easter Sunday murders.
Wow.
So
well, thanks for that.
You're welcome. With that, we hope you keep listening.
And we hope you
Keep
it
weird, but not so weird that you don't turn into what I'm pretty sure next is Listener Tale.
Yeah.
Party. I have the breath of a woman who just ate a salad. Gin salad.
That's going to the end of that.
Because I had a little salad with a little garlic.
No garlic
and vinegar.
Some garlic in
Make for
here.
stinky ass breath.
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Let's do this.